Om Tava Kathamratam Tapta Jivanam Kavivareditham Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadadatam Bhuvivarnanti Purirajana. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome everyone to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We are on the chapter, The Master with the Brahmo Devotees, and it takes place over a few different dates over the span of a couple of months. This, I mentioned last time, is a little bit curious. The previous entry was November 1882 without any date, and we finished that. Now we're on December 1882. So for some reason, and was not very particular during November and December, there's several of them like that, and until we get probably to the next chapter, then we'll get dates again, maybe. Yes, January 1st will be the next. So this is sometime in December 1882. M has now been coming to Sri Ramakrishna for a good number of months, and their relationship, even from the very beginning, of course, was very, very close. But now M cannot live without seeing him. It was like that from the very beginning. And Thakur, of course, looked upon him as one of his inner circle devotees. In the afternoon, Sri Ramakrishna was seated on the west porch of his room in the temple garden at Dakshineshwar. Among others, Babu Ram, Ram Dayal, and M were present. These three were going to spend the night with the Master. M intended to stay the following day also, for he was having his Christmas holidays. Babu Ram had only recently begun to visit the Master. Okay, now we don't read about it here, but there's a section in the Great Master describing this first night that Babu Ram stayed with Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar. He came probably shortly after Swami Vivekananda. Narendra came first, would have been Rakhal, Swami Brahmananda, then Swami Vivekananda, and then Babu Ram Maharaj, later Swami Premananda. And he was a couple of years older than the others. He was born in 1981. And Swamiji and Rakhal, Swami Brahmananda, were born within, I think, 10 days of each other, within 2 weeks of each other at least, 2 years later. Now, this is very significant and interesting this night. And as I say, we don't get all of the details here. We find them in the Great Master. This Ram Dayal was someone known to Sri Ramakrishna, and Babu Ram happened to run into him, and they were going there, and then Thakur invited them to spend the night there. As we read in the Great Master that Thakur had some conversation with the Babu Ram and asked him many questions. Babu Ram belonged to a very pious family in a village called Antpur, midway between Kolkata and Jarnambati and Kamarpukur. Many people will stop there on their way if they can go for pilgrimage there. His mother was greatly devoted to Sri Ramakrishna, Matangani Devi, and his sister, Krishna Bhavani, was married to Balaram Bose. So there was a strong family connection, and Babu Ram, I don't know if he was a classmate or went to the same school, but he also knew Rakhal. it doesn't seem like he was one of the Brahmo members, and he wasn't a great student. He wasn't interested in study too much, and Thakur would tease him sometimes. As you studied for your exams, he knew that he wasn't cut out for that type of life. He was very pure, and this is the special feature about Baburam, that Thakur always needed someone to stay with him as an attendant. And for some time, Latu was there, Latu Maharaj, who became Swami Adbhutananda. For some time, Rakal, Swami Brahmananda. But Thakur used to say the two of them, half the time they're experiencing different spiritual states, and he needed somebody to look after him all of the time. He wanted this Baburam. Not quite at this stage yet, but after some time, because he said that in Baburam, of all of the disciples, this is including Swamiji and Swami Brahmananda, he was pure to the very bone. He was the purest of all of them. And Thakur said when he was in certain spiritual states, he would go into some very deep states of samadhi or ecstasy. He couldn't bear the touch of anyone who wasn't perfectly pure. So he wanted this Baburam to stay with him. And of course, eventually he renounced everything and became one of the stalwarts. But this night that I'm talking about, when they went to sleep, first of all, Thakur only slept a couple hours at night, if that, and half the time he's in ecstasy. But in the middle of the night, he went and he woke up this Ramdayal. Of course, Baburam was there. They were either sleeping on the floor or on the veranda outside. It usually depended. And this is December, so a little bit cool, probably inside. But anyhow, he woke up also. And each time that Thakur woke up this Ramdayal, he asked about Narendra. And have you seen him lately? He hasn't come lately. Such a wonderful boy. I can't live without seeing him. I feel it like my heart being wrung like a wet cloth, like a gamcha, a wet gum. And you please tell him to come and see me. And then he went back to bed and they fell asleep. And then shortly later he came and woke up this Ramdayal again. Same thing went on several times throughout the night. And there's a Baburam who hadn't yet met Narendra, apparently. He thought to himself, how the master loves this boy and how cruel he is not to come more often. And later, of course, they became, inseparable friends. We read many times that they had a little clash, or Swamiji would scold him about this and then this or that, and then Swamiji would come and fall at his feet and beg his forgiveness and say, Thakur loved you so much. But these were rare things. Actually, they had a very, very close, sweet, loving relationship. And so the final day of Swamiji's life, it was Swami Premananda that he spent most time with. Went for a long walk with him and told him about his future plans for the mutt and everything on the very final day. So this is Baburam. This Anandpur is also the place where Swamiji and several of the direct disciples went on Christmas Eve. Of course, not knowing it was Christmas Eve. And they lit a dhuni fire outside in the back of the house, and they sat around, and as I say, without knowing it was Christmas Eve, somehow Swamiji started talking about the life of Christ and the disciples, how they renounced everything, and he said, let us all resolve now to renounce the world. And then they all took their monastic names. It wasn't all of them, of course. Some did it a little bit later. I don't remember how many, 11 or something like that. Anyhow, if you go there, you'll see there's a beautiful relief with the statues and all of them there. And Swamiji wanted the name of Swami Ramakrishnananda, but when he saw Shashi, who had served him so much, he said, no, you're the one who deserves that name. And at that time, Swamiji probably took the name Vividishananda. He used different names. When he traveled, he tried to travel incognito a little bit. So sometimes he used the name Satchidananda, sometimes Vividishananda, possibly sometimes Vivekananda also. And it seems that before he left for the West, that the Maharaja of Khetri was the one who encouraged him to use that name Vivekananda, as we know. And he was very instrumental in so many ways. He provided a lot of the clothes and monetary support for Swamiji, and helped look after his mother. He was his disciple, a few years younger than Swamiji, and Swamiji relied on him, and he loved Swamiji very much, and then died a very tragic death. He fell off the roof. Some people think pushed, maybe some intrigue, palace intrigue or something, but that was also a big blow to Swamiji. So this is that night that I'm talking about, that Baburam learned for the first time of Thakur's tremendous love for Swami Vivekananda and Narendra. So it simply says, Baburam had only recently begun to visit the Master. Master to the devotees. A man becomes liberated even in this life when he knows that God is the doer of all things. Okay, now, no distinction, Ishvara Koti, Jiva Koti. He's just saying that one can be liberated in life. We wonder sometimes, all of this business of samadhi and the body falling off in 21 days, that how do we become Jivan Muktas? How do we become liberated in this life? There are many ways, through path of devotion and other types of realizations, knowledge. Here, he's saying that one particular thing, he knows that God is the doer of all things. That means that we understand that this ego is some phantom. It's not a real thing. This sense of I that we have is based on all sorts of false identification with, we say with body, mind, and senses, but mostly with the mind, and mostly with personality. And we have the sense that we're responsible for everything that we do. And yet, when we analyze, we wonder, why do things happen the way they happen? It's a very curious thing. I remember, this will sound like a very odd example to use, but many, many years ago, I happened to see a movie. It wasn't a very good movie, but there was one interesting aspect to it. It was called The Freshman. Probably no one has ever seen it. It wasn't a well-known movie. And Marlon Brando played the role of the Godfather in it, but kind of a spoof of the Godfather. Kind of making fun of the role that he had in the famous Godfather. And somebody else was in it, and he was a freshman going to college. And all sorts of mishaps happened. When he got there, he lost his bag, and then somebody came and found it and offered to put the bag in his car and drive him to his dorm. And he did it there, and then by accident, they forgot to take the bag out of the trunk. And then later they happened to run into each other, and he grabbed hold of him and said, "Where's my bag?" And he said, "Oh yeah, you come and meet me." And then he went there and he introduced him to his father, who was Marlon Brando, the Godfather. And then they said, well, now that you're here, if you want to earn a little money, we can arrange something, this and that. A whole long thing, and it seemed like one incident led to another. Then at the end, we find out that each and every step was planned. They laid a trap for him. So when it seemed like he was making a decision at each stage, they had set it up for him. And when circumstances were just happening, it was pre-planned. So I'm not saying everything in life is like that, but sometimes we look back and we wonder, how did I end up here from where I started as a young boy? How did I end up here? And we see that, oh, well, this happened and that happened. Oh, I thought it was just chance that happened. Is it possible it wasn't just chance? All of these different events that took place. Now, when I look back on my own life and my first trip to India, this happened and that happened, and I happened to see this book and I happened to see that book, I wonder, was it chance or was it trap laid for me? Of course, it's a little egotistical to think somebody went to that trouble to lay a trap for me. But in any event, point is, we really don't know why and how things happen. There's all cause and effect. It's a very odd type of thing. But what Thakur is really saying is get rid of this idea of I am the doer, this pride that we have. That those who can get rid of this strong belief in their own power, that without realizing there's a higher power behind us. He gives the example in another place that when the cooking pot is on the fire, and everything is boiling, and the vegetables are jumping up and down. They think they're jumping up and down on their own power. He says, but as soon as it's removed from the fire and everything cools down, where's their power to jump up and down? So it's not our own power. There's something inside of us. This divine power is there, without which we couldn't do anything. We wouldn't exist. So here he's saying that this will be, he'll give other things, he'll say other reasons how we can become liberated in life. But here he says, when he knows that God is the doer of all things. Once Keshav came here with Shambhu Malik. Shambhu Malik was another, he lived nearby in Dakshineshwar, and he was another devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. I said to him, not even a leaf moves except by the will of God. Now we have to understand all of these things. When I first read these things, I think to myself, oh, God's spending all day long trying to decide which way this leaf is going to fall and which way that leaf is going to fall. It doesn't mean that. If the whole thing is this projection out of this divine cosmic mind of God, then everything is happening according to that cosmic dreamer. And everything seems to be the individuals doing it, and is the wind blowing it this way or that way, or because the dream is taking place. And there are different ways of understanding. These are very difficult things to know, how and why things take place. But then he says, where is man's free will? All are under the will of God. So ultimate free will, do we have any individual free will? This is another question. This is another theory, we can say, that Thakur also talks about, that we have a certain amount of free will. And we have that illustration of the cow that's tethered to a post. And it can graze within a circle described by the radius, which is the length of rope. But it can't go beyond that. So it has the ability to, a little freedom within, but it's restricted. So sometimes Thakur uses this illustration. There's one time when he says, oh, I've heard that before. Is this from the Englishman, this illustration? So we're not quite sure about it. But in Gita and other things, we get this sliding scale of free will. That the more we're bound by rajas and tamas, by our desires and by our old samskaras, the less free will we have. And the more we develop sattva, the more we can make decisions based on something other than desire. Decision is based on desire, it's not free. That means the desire is making me make that decision. If the desire is there, and I can say that we teach children that, okay, there's a piece of cake there. You have a desire to eat it, but your friend is there. So you curb that desire and say, let me share it with my friend. A little free will is there to a certain extent. But if we analyze, we can take, well, that child has that samskara which is making him make that decision. Very hard to say. This, what is causing what. We just read this morning about Lavakusha. Lavakusha, was it this morning or last night? Yeah. That, the story of Ahalya and how her husband, Gautama Muni, got very angry at his wife. Indra was lusting after his wife, Ahalya. She was very beautiful, and he came in the form of Gautama Muni. She had no idea that it wasn't her husband. So when he came back and heard that he had come to her that way, he was furious and he cursed her. May you turn into a pillar of stone, something like that. And so it happened. And then later he found out the whole story. So he said, what can I do to get out of this? He said, in Treta Yuga, Rama will come, and at the touch of his feet, then you'll get your human form back again. So it happened that way. So some sage was saying, you don't know the power of your father, Rama. They were very angry at him. They were his enemies at that time. And he said, no, we know this whole story. But you're saying it's the power of Rama. Who can say? What is the real cause and effect here? Well, did she get back her human form because of the touch of Rama? Or was it the power of the words of the sage Gautama? Who can say? So the same thing, Thakur used to say, very hard to say what exactly the actual cause of something is. There are visible causes and remote causes to things. So sometimes something will happen and some will say, it must have been my karma. something I did in a past lifetime. Say we have a car accident, God forbid. We have a car accident, and somebody else will say, well, what are you talking about? You went through a red light. Why? How is that not the cause of it? Now, both can be true. Huh? Both can be true, that we did something, we were destined to have some accident ourselves, but this is the way it happened. So we really can't say. Better to have a little humility and say that, yes, we're acting as if we're in charge of things, but we know deep down that anything may happen. We don't know the reason for everything, and we don't know, even if we do things perfectly, how they'll turn out. So when we say everything is the will of God, we can take it also that the way things happen may be up to us to a certain extent, but the results are out of our hands. And this is the attitude to take for Karma Yoga. So where is man's free will? This idea of free will is really more of a Western idea. Not so much. In fact, very often when Thakur and others are talking about it, they'll use the English words, free will, free will. Because there's no perfect Ichha Shakti or something, there's no perfect equivalent to it. And this idea of Antaryaman also is very important, that God within will encourage us, will impel us, will inspire us to act in a particular way. We have this concept also. Nangta was a man of great knowledge. This is Totapuri, Sri Ramakrishna's Vedantic guru, who gave him sannyasa and gave him that, led him to the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Nangta was a man of great knowledge. He was a real jnani. Everything was soham. I am that. He didn't care for anything, that any reliance on God or surrender to God's will was looked upon as weakness to him. He didn't care for those things. And attained perfection through it. So we're not criticizing him for that. This is another path. Nangta was a man of great knowledge, yet even he was about to drown himself in the Ganges. He stayed here 11 months. At one time he suffered from stomach trouble. That means he had excruciating dysentery, blood dysentery. This horrible thing, and Thakur himself suffered from dysentery quite often. The excruciating pain made him lose control over himself, and he wanted to drown himself in the river. Now, it's not ordinary suicide. His feeling was, I've attained everything. Whether the body stays or doesn't stay, it makes no difference to me. So he thought, let the body go if it's so much trouble. If it's keeping the mind from being lost in samadhi, then what's the point of it? That was his attitude. There was a long shoal near the bathing ghat. However far he went into the river, he couldn't find water above his knees. Then he understood everything. Now, what did he understand? We have a little footnote here. He realized that man is not free even to kill himself, that everything depends on the will of the Divine Mother. Then it says, see introduction, page 31. So there's a longer discussion about this. But anyhow, he came back, and somehow it was a great revelation for him. And he felt that the reason he'd come to Dakshineshwar, not simply for the sake of initiating Sri Ramakrishna and leading him to Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but so that his spiritual life could be rounded out. He had reached the roof, but now he could see so many ways of getting up and going back down again. Then Thakur says, at one time I was very ill and was about to cut my throat with a knife. We don't know exactly what he's referring to. We know when he had his first realization in the Kali temple that he talked about that. This is also a bit of just a general expression, that ready to kill myself, ready to cut my throat with a knife. It doesn't always mean literally that way. But when it was in the Kali temple, it seemed to be quite literal, because he saw the knife hanging on the wall. Anyhow, I was very ill and was about to cut my throat with a knife. Therefore I say, O Mother, I am the machine and thou art the operator. I am the chariot and thou art the driver. I move as thou movest me. I do as thou makest me do. Now remember, he says, this is the sign of someone who is liberated in life. So we shouldn't expect to even understand what this means at this point. We have to understand first the hollow nature of this I, the unreal nature of this ego that belongs to Maya. As long as we cling to this idea that I am doing everything, then it doesn't make sense to say God is the doer, Divine Mother is doing everything, I'm just an instrument. So a very high ideal. The devotee sang kirtan in the Master's room. Dwell, O Lord, O lover of bhakti, in the Vrindavan of my heart, and my devotion unto thee will be thy Radha, dearly loved. My body will be Nanda's home, my tenderness will be Yashoda, my longing for deliverance will be the gentle gopi maids. Lift the Govardhan of my sin, and slay my 6 unyielding passions, fierce as the demons sent by Kamsa. Sweetly play the flute of thy grace, charming the milk cow of my mind, abide in the pasture of my soul. Dwell by the Jamuna of my yearning, under the banyan of my hope, forever gracious to thy servant. And if naught but the cowherd's love can hold thee in Vrindavan's vale, then, Lord, let Dasharati too become thy cowherd and thy slave. Again they sang. Sing, O bird that nestles deep within my heart. Sing, O bird that sits on the kalpa tree of Brahman. Sing God's everlasting praise. Taste, O bird, of the 4 fruits of the kalpa tree, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Sing, O bird, he alone is the comfort of my soul. Sing, O bird, he alone is my life's enduring joy. O thou wondrous bird of my life, sing aloud in my heart. Unceasingly sing, O bird, sing forevermore, even as the thirsty chatak sings for the raindrop from the cloud. A devotee from Nandan Bagan entered the room with his friends. The Master looked at him and said, everything inside him can be seen through his eyes, as one sees the objects in a room through a glass door. This is not a good sign. Huh? Of course, it could have been. It's possible that he saw what a pure soul he was, but we get the impression that let him not pretend he's a very high spiritual soul, that I can see that there are some knots and twists there. The devotee and his brothers always celebrated the anniversary of the Brahmo Samaj at their house in Nandan Bagan. Now we've seen already how many different celebrations, annual, semi-annual celebrations there are in different homes of the Brahmo Samaj, of devotees. Sri Ramakrishna had taken part in these festivals. The evening worship began in the temples. The Master was seated on the small couch in his room, absorbed in meditation. The change from day to night was a time when Thakur's mood automatically changed. That it happened all of the time. We read about it in M's very first visit, that he said he saw, as it was getting dark, that Thakur became very indrawn, that his mind would automatically go into a spiritual mood at that time. Of course, all the temple worship is going on then, and you can hear the conch and the gong and the bell being rung and all of that. The very also all these auspicious sounds, and it's just a very inspiring period. My first visit to Dakshineswar was just at that time, just as it was getting dark, and we could hear everything going on in the temple, and just the mood changes. And with it going from light to dark, everything changes. So Thakur used to say that put everything aside at that time and only think of God. This is a kind of a tradition that, of course, goes back to Gayatri Mantra and other things, that this at the time of these Sandhya periods, morning to or early morning to daybreak, and then in the evening again at sunset, that these are times to repeat the Gayatri Mantra and other things. I used to wonder in Calcutta, sometimes if, my very first trip, if you go into some shop or restaurant or something like that, and they turn the lights on, that means that it's just gotten dark enough outside that they have to have the inside lights on. And you'll see people, they'll do some little thing. Huh? Just indicating in their own way. They're just force of habit, probably, most of them, but that there's something auspicious, and one should think of God at that time. The sun, you see that also on your part? I used to find it very curious. Then, of course, next second they would forget it and go back to whatever they were doing. So the evening worship began at the temples. The master was seated on the small couch in his room, absorbed in meditation. He went into an ecstatic mood and said a little later, "Mother, please draw him to thee. He is so modest and humble. He has been visiting thee." Was the master referring to Baburam, who later became one of his foremost disciples? These are rhetorical questions. This is, I'm not really wondering. M is pretty certain. And we can also be pretty certain that Thakur, he recognized his inner circle people. He recognized, and Baburam was one of the Ishvara Kotis. Swami Premananda, Swami Niranjanananda, Raja Maharaj Swamiji, and Niranjanananda Swami, and Purna, usually. In the beginning, sometimes we read Bhavanath also. So, he of all the disciples, he was the one who was most loving towards the devotees. He was the mother of Bellarmut. He was the mother of Bellarmut. There's so many stories that when devotees would go there, how he would look after them and how he would feed them. To the young monks, he was also the mother, but a scolding mother, because he had a very high standard that he wanted them to follow. If they didn't follow that, they'd get a good scolding, but they got an equal amount of love. So he was a very, very sweet and pure and humble soul, Baburam Maharaj. I heard a couple of stories that we don't read about some of these too much. One, that devotees, very often sometimes devotees would be there and they'd get caught in the rain or they couldn't go home that night, and he would have the monks sleep on the floor and give them a cot to sleep on. One time they got caught in the rain and their clothes were soaked. He gave them a garrow of the monks to wear. And there was another incident, our Swami Abhayananda. He was after Swami Premananda, he was the manager of Bellarmut for many years. Everybody knew him, and he was a tremendous jnani and very, very highly respected. He was kind of being trained up by Baburam Maharaj to become the next manager. And one day it was maybe Thakur's birthday, some big festival day. Some devotees came very late in the day. So Swami Premananda always had to feed them, even if he himself had to go and cook something. No one would leave without getting fed. So he said to Swami Abhayananda, what was his name? Bharat Maharaj, yes. To Bharat Maharaj, he said, go and see if there's anything still in the kitchen that we can give to these devotees. And he went, there was nothing. And then Swami Premananda said to him, did you yourself take prasad? And he said, yes. You yourself took prasad, knowing that perhaps someone will come late and perhaps there'll be nothing there. And he felt a little embarrassed. And then I heard for the rest of his life, he never took prasad on the festival days until at night when everything was closed and no one else would come. So anyhow, certainly there has to be, when Thakur says, Mother, please draw him to thee. He is so modest and humble, he has been visiting thee. That he was talking about this Baburam Swami Premananda. His birthday is coming up soon. I think December 23rd, perhaps. The master explained the different kinds of samadhi to the devotees. Thakur knew all of these different things and had different terms for everything. Chetana samadhi, sthiti samadhi, Unmana Samadhi, all these different things. No one's ever, who knows where he got all these things from. And how many different ways one goes into Samadhi. And he had all of these experiences, creeping like an ant, jumping like a monkey, hopping like a bird, all the different things that he had experienced. And Bhava Samadhi, and with visions, without visions, so many different things. We read how forbidden it is to tell anybody about our spiritual experiences. Then we say, well, Thakur did it all the time. We shouldn't compare ourselves to him. He had a reason. He wanted to give us that hope and that conviction that these things are possible, and give us some inkling of the joy that comes from these things, so that we'll strive to realize them. If he hadn't done it, who would know that these things are possible? And the extent and the variety of different spiritual experiences. Just reading things in books, it wouldn't mean anything. But hearing from his lips these things, it was tremendously important. That's why all of his reminiscences, all of talking about his spiritual experiences, his sadhana, and his visions, and his different types of samadhi, these are so invaluable, really. Then the conversation turned to the joy and suffering of life. Why did God create so much suffering? Okay. First of all, there's the assumption that we're going to blame God for all of it. Of course, if Thakur was saying God is responsible for everything, then we can ask that question. Then we have to consider our own karma sometimes, and other factors. It's, again, as I say, these are not easy questions. M. Once Vidyasagar said in a mood of pique. Vidyasagar, he was Orthodox Hindu in some ways, and in other ways a little bit of a skeptic and agnostic. He was an interesting mixture of things. On one hand, he was a great reformist, and on the other hand, he wasn't really a member of the Brahmo Samaj, and in that way, a very sincere soul. But Thakur said he didn't realize that gold hidden within his heart. M was very close to him because he worked for him. Then they had a falling out. There was a kind of sad thing that M's students didn't do very well in the exams one time, and Vidyasagar accused him that, look, you're always visiting that Bhagavad Thakur, that madman at Dakshineswar, and even taking some of these boys there sometimes. That's why they didn't do well. So M, he was equally high-minded. Vidyasagar was very high-minded. Something happened with him also. He was criticized for something, and he gave up his position as president of the Sanskrit College, I think, something like that. And so M was the same. He said, no one will criticize Thakur that way and everything. And he quit, and then he was in big trouble. But before that, they were very close. We read when he brought Thakur to Vidyasagar's house, that they were serving everybody, and they went to serve him. And he said, oh, it's not necessary, don't make a fuss serving him. He's a member of the household. So M is quoting him. Once Vidyasagar said in a mood of pique, what is the use of calling on God? Just think of this incident. At one time, Genghis Khan plundered a country and imprisoned many people. The number of prisoners rose to about 100,000. The commander of his army said to him, Your Majesty, who will feed them? It is risky to keep them with us. It will be equally dangerous to release them. What shall I do? Genghis Khan said, That's true, what can be done? Well, have them killed. The order was accordingly given to cut them to pieces. Now, God saw this slaughter, didn't he? But he didn't stop it in any way. Therefore, I don't need God, whether he exists or not. I don't derive any good from him. I don't think this really means that he was a complete atheist or anything. He had a little bit of that agnostic thing, and as it says, in a mood of pique. So who is he complaining to? He's complaining to God, really. So he wasn't really a pure atheist. Master. Now, this is, I think, is the best answer that anybody can give. Is it possible to understand God's actions and his motives? So we have to learn sometimes that there aren't answers for every question. Just because there's a question doesn't mean there's an answer for it. And if there's no answer, then we have to ask ourselves, is it a good question? Is it a reasonable question? Can we really expect an answer? And then Thakur will again talk about the limitations of the human mind, that we're trying to get answers. We're trying to pour in a huge amount of liquid into a very small container. It can't hold it. That his mind is bound by time, cause, and time, space, and causation. And some of these questions are too big, that they go beyond the limitations of the mind. They don't have easy or good answers for us. So, Master, is it possible to understand God's action and his motive? He creates, he preserves, and he destroys. Can we ever understand why he destroys? I say to the Divine Mother, O Mother, I do not need to understand. Please give me love for thy lotus feet. Other times he'll say, of course, there can be good without bad. There'll always be these pairs of opposites, up and down, heat and cold. This is the nature of things. That there has to be all sorts of things in God's creation. There'll be flowering trees, and there'll be some that are also poisonous trees. This is the nature of things. So I say to the Divine Mother, O Mother, I do not need to understand. Please give me love for thy lotus feet. The aim of human life is to attain bhakti. As for other things, the Mother knows best. When we talk about attaining knowledge, this isn't the knowledge that we get. And this idea of becoming all-knowing, sarvagya, it doesn't mean that we can answer all of these questions. There was a school of the Buddhists, the Kita Sankhyas, I think it's called, that they believed the Buddha was all-knowing, that he knew the number of insects in the world. He would have to know the number of grains of sand. He's all-knowing. But the Vedantic idea is that we don't know everything in particular. It's impossible. What we know is that just as knowing gold, we know everything made of gold. If we know the real nature and value and worth of gold, then we know the real value of bracelets and earrings and anklets and all of those things. So all-knowing in that sense. But if we attain God realization, will we be able to answer these questions? Why is there so much suffering in the world and everything? Thakur, if anybody could have answered, he could have. He doesn't tell us. He'll give different possible attitudes to take towards these things. It's our karma, it's the play of the Divine Mother, all different possible attitudes to take, but no one definitive type of answer. This isn't the type of knowledge we get when we attain knowledge. So the aim of human life is to attain bhakti. As for other things, the Mother knows best. I've come to the garden to eat mangoes. What is the use of my calculating the number of trees, branches, and leaves? I only eat the mangoes. I don't need to know the number of trees and leaves. This is also a very typical Buddhist attitude. You have all heard, I'm sure, the story. There's a parable that Buddha used to tell of the man who was shot with an arrow. And it was a poison arrow that was in danger of dying. They had to pull the arrow very quickly. And when the doctor came, he said first, I want to know who shot it. I want to know what village they came from, what caste they belonged to, what their reason was. A whole long list of things. Then the Buddha said to his disciples, tell me, what will happen if he waits until he gets all of these answers before removing the arrow and saving him? And they said, he'll die before that. And he said, yes, in the same way. Don't bother about all these different questions. That we want to remove that arrow. We want to remove that ignorance. We want to attain the goal of life. We want to eat the mangoes. If we say, no, I won't eat the mangoes till I know how many twigs and branches and trees there are and everything, we'll never get to it. So this is what it means to have some priorities and some perspective on life. Baburam M. and Ramdayal slept that night on the floor of the master's room. For some reason, M doesn't explain all of the other things, but somehow probably Swami Premananda told Swami Sharudananda, and that's how it got into the great master. It was an early hour of the morning, about 2 or 3 o'clock. The room was dark. Sri Ramakrishna was seated on his bed and now and then conversed with the devotees. So this is when he got up. Probably slept for a couple of hours, and as I told you, he got up several times before that, but that was enough for him. And he wasn't one of those nice people who says, oh, they're sleeping, let them sleep. Because he knew this was a rare occasion to come and stay with him. And he was always in an ecstatic mood early morning also when he woke up. First of all, he's in ecstasy most of the night, not really sleeping. But whenever he got up, he would clap his hands and dance, sing and dance sometimes just by himself, go to all of the pictures in his room and with folded hands, address all of them. And so he wanted them to see these things and to sit for meditation. He would say, don't waste the whole night. Now sit in meditation or some spiritual conversation. So seated on his bed, probably having ecstasy, and now and then converse with the devotees. Master. Now we get a very important discussion on Daya and Maya. There's a very important theme in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. Remember that Daya, compassion, and Maya, attachment, are 2 different things. Attachment means the feeling of mineness towards one's relatives. It is the love one feels for one's parents, one's brother, one's sister, one's wife, and children. Compassion is the love one feels for all beings of the world. It is an attitude of equality. If you see anywhere an instance of compassion, as in Vidyasagar. So this is what I was saying before, that when we see Thakur criticizing somebody, we have to look at the other side, how much he praises them also. One very good example is Ishan. There's a whole long chapter, Advice to Ishan, and we think Thakur, he thinks this Ishan is an idiot. How are we scolding him and saying, you didn't listen to me and you're doing this and at this stage of your life? But we have to see how many times he praised this Ishan. He said every bit as compassionate and charitable as Vidyasagar. Swamiji also praised him. Swamiji was actually friends with the Ishan's son. And that's how he would go to the house, and he knew this Ishan very well that way. So here we see that he's praising this Vidyasagar because he had that love and compassion for strangers. These people who came to him were unknown people. Anybody who was poor and needy and lacking of education, widows, that he would do whatever he could to help. So this Maya and Daya, they're 2 different things, but they're not 2 different things. And Thakur emphasizes this. They're 2 different things because one is so restricted. But we don't discard Maya. We discard the limitations of Maya because it's still love. There's something very beautiful and wonderful about the love that a mother has for a child, or a husband for a wife, or a child for a parent. There's nothing wrong with that. Thakur, he'll say, take that love, but expand it so that we feel that love for everyone. Is it possible? No, it's not possible. It's not possible for a mother to love somebody else's child the way she loves her own child. But it can be expanded so that at least a portion of it, so that we're not ready to just kick the other person's child out of the room to feed our own child, that it'll be expanded. And we know that there are many people like that. They'll work in the orphanages and do child care, and they'll love all of these other children. They'll have a little special love for their own child. That's okay. But it's not so restrictive. So the difference between Maya and Daya is one of degree. It's not an absolute distinction because they're both love. Both love and attachment. Now Swamiji emphasizes the point that the monk has an advantage here. because the monk doesn't have his own child, his own wife, and therefore can love everyone equally. There's a beautiful statement that he made when he had a conversation with this Ingersoll. There was a man named Robert Ingersoll who was also a lecturer. And during Swamiji's time, there were many people who gave lectures, and people would come. There were no movie theaters at that time, no television and everything, so this was one way people would pass the time. They would go and listen to speakers. And he said that, I believe that this world is everything, and the most sensible thing is to get whatever we can, whatever enjoyment we can out of this world, to squeeze the orange of the world and get the juice from it. So Swamiji said, I agree with you, but I know a better way of squeezing the orange. And he said, because I have no wife or children or anything like that, that I can love everyone equally. And he went on, I don't remember all of it, but something like that. So he was saying that, yes, what you do is fine. He said, but you do it my way, and you'll get every single drop of juice from the orange. You'll enjoy it more without that attachment to it. With this Maya, the attachment means that there's suffering. There's suffering because there'll always be separation. There'll always be disappointment. That's inevitable in life. And this attachment means that we ourselves are benefiting from it. It's not pure. That, oh, how sad I am, how lonely I'll be if anything happens to you. It comes back to us a little bit. So there's a little bit of selfishness, even though it can be, even the love that a mother has for a child, a little bit, a drop of that will be there. Whereas it can be completely absent when we do it with regard to others. So Thakur talks about this daya. Now we shouldn't get confused when he says that the compassion, who are you to have compassion for others? Then he's saying, okay, Maya is good, daya is much better. There's something higher than that, called prema, love. Don't do it out of compassion, but do it out of love. Do it seeing God in all. Don't do it from out of pity or thinking that I can help somebody else. There's even a higher way of doing it. So he's not putting down daya. He's saying that compared to Maya, daya is far greater. But compared to daya, prema, or love, is much greater. So we have to see things in perspective. So remember, this is 2 in the morning, or 3 in the morning. He's talking to them. Remember that daya, compassion, and Maya, attachment, are two different things. Attachment means the feeling of mine-ness towards one's relatives. This is mamata. This mamata, it's very interesting that in ordinary usage is a very nice thing. It's a very positive thing. We won't name children mamata unless it's something positive. That it means this feeling, yes, you belong to me. This is mamata. In Vedanta, it's a very bad thing. It means that I have the feeling that I can possess something. So the I and mine of the devotee are very much different. The I and mine of the jnani, these are things that we have to get rid of. That I am responsible, that I do everything, and things belong to me. I own them. I possess them. So that mamata, that's a bad thing. But this feeling that he says attachment, feeling of mine-ness towards my relatives, it's good on one level. That they're not strangers to us. We love them. They belong to us. We belong to them. It's a very good thing. We should feel that. Otherwise, we're very dry people. But at the same time, we don't possess them, especially parents and children. Sometimes the parents feel that, the children, they only exist to please us. I'm a scientist. My child should become a scientist. That's what I want. We have to think, what do they want? And really let them to be happy in any way that they're happy. Don't let it be the way I want them to be happy. Then this mine-ness is a bad thing. So attachment means the feeling of mine-ness towards one's relatives. It is the love one feels for one's parents, one's brother, one's sister, one's wife and children. Compassion is the love one feels for all beings of the world. Who had this compassion? Swamiji. Swamiji had it. Sri Ramakrishna had it, but he was lost in samadhi half the time. He came for a different purpose, but we see it when he was traveling with Mathur Babu, and there was famine, and he was in the village, and these poor people were there, and he said, "I'm not budging unless you give them something to eat, give them some cloth," and all of that. He had it, of course, but for Swamiji it was a passion. This feeling was for all the beings. It didn't matter who, or where, or anything. It is an attitude of equality. If you see anywhere an instance of compassion, as in Vidyasagar, know that it is due to the grace of God. Through compassion one serves all beings. See, who are you to serve beings? Who are you to have compassion? We have to understand that Thakur, everything, it has to be seen through his eyes. What is he feeling at the time when he's saying all of this? This compassion he's talking about now is not looking down on anybody. That means it's real, full, unselfish love for others. Maya also comes from God. So it's, as I say, it's not a bad thing. Through Maya, God makes one serve one's relatives. But one thing should be remembered. Maya keeps us in ignorance and entangles us in the world. It also makes us suffer. Whereas Daya makes our hearts pure and gradually unties our bonds. So it's the same thing, only Maya has this tinge of tamas and rajas, and Daya is a pure sattva, that is helping us overcome our attachments. God cannot be realized without purity of heart. One receives the grace of God by subduing the passions. Now he's telling us, what is purity of heart? When we're free from lust, anger, and greed. Then one sees God. I tried many things in order to conquer lust. Now, what was that for Thakur? This is a joke. We can hardly imagine. I think he says, one time I had a slight feeling of lust. One time in his whole life. And he said, Mother, you give me that feeling again, I'm going to kill myself. And that was the end of it. But at least so we know that if he can feel that, then of course it's nothing for us to be surprised about. When I was 10 or 11 years old and lived in Kamarpukur, I first experienced samadhi. He was, of course, walking with a group of women, I believe, who were going to this Vishalakshi temple, and he saw in the sky, it was the rainy season, suddenly this black, dark rain clouds came and covered the whole sky, and these beautiful white cranes came. And just seeing the beauty of that, the white cranes and the black background, he lost all out of consciousness and fell down. As I was passing through a paddy field, I saw something and was overwhelmed. There are certain characteristics of God vision. One sees light, feels joy, and experiences the upsurge of a great current in one's chest, like the bursting of a rocket. The next day, Babu Ram and Ram Dayal returned to Calcutta. M spent the day and the night with the Master. This is the end of that day, and we'll start next time. As I say, it only says December 1882. It's page 161. So we will stop here. Have our chant. Om Niranjanam Nityamananda Rupam Bhaktanokam Bhatudha Vikraham Lai Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who was stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the Divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. So I thank all of you for joining this class, and we will see you next time. Please check your emails. We've just recently sent out the schedule for next month. We'll have a guest speaker with a Zoom session next month, Jeffrey Long, who has spoken here several different times. Unfortunately, we won't have our Christmas Eve program because there's no way to do it without everyone being here and singing and the kids, but we're trying to encourage the kids to do some video presentation that we can put on the website. You can see it by YouTube, and we'll let you know about that later also.